You know what's strange? Some people can meet a stranger and within an hour they're sharing their deepest fears. Other people? They've known someone for 10 years and still won't tell them what really keeps them up at night. Think about this for a moment. What makes someone incapable of trusting, not difficult, not cautious, actually incapable? Today, we're looking at people who don't trust anyone, and the psychology behind it might surprise you. Picture this. You're at work. Someone offers to help you with a project. Most people think, oh, that's nice. But this person, their first thought is, what do they want from me? It's automatic, instant, not a choice. Psychologists sometimes call this hypervigilance, but it's more than that. It's a constant scanning of every interaction for hidden motives. Here's something most people never notice. These aren't antisocial people. They're not rude. They might even seem perfectly normal. They laugh at jokes. They make small talk. They function. But watch closely. Notice how they answer personal questions. How was your weekend? Becomes pretty good. How was yours? Notice how they deflect. Or think about a moment when someone shares a vulnerable story. Most people feel closer to that person, connected. This person, they're thinking, why are they telling me this? What are they setting up? And here's where it gets interesting. They're incredibly skilled at reading people, micro-expressions, voice tone, body language, inconsistencies. While everyone else is taking things at face value, they're analyzing, processing, looking for cracks in the story. From a psychological perspective, they've developed what researchers call a threat detection system. It's always on, always working, always protecting them from something. But protecting them from what, exactly? Here's the thing most people assume. These people were born this way, cold, distant, untrusting. But the psychology tells a different story. Imagine this. You're 7 years old. Your parent promises to come to your school play. You keep looking at the door, waiting. They never show up. One time, kids are resilient. They bounce back. But what if this happens again? And again, and again. Researchers describe this as attachment disruption. Your brain is trying to learn, can I rely on people? And the answer it keeps getting is no. But here's where it gets deeper. It's not always about dramatic betrayal. Sometimes it's quieter. Picture a teenager who trusts a friend with a secret. By Monday, everyone knows. Or someone who falls in love, really opens up, and then watches that person walk away. Each time, the brain is collecting data. Trust equals vulnerability. Vulnerability equals pain. And this is the part most people miss. These people aren't being irrational. They're being perfectly rational based on their experience. From a psychological perspective, they've learned what's called a conditioned response. Trust triggers anxiety because historically, trust has led to harm. Think about how powerful that is. The very thing that should bring us closer to people trust has become a danger signal in their mind. But something even more interesting is happening beneath the surface. Most people assume not trusting anyone is purely a weakness. But here's what researchers have found. There are actually advantages, real ones. Picture this scenario. Someone walks into a room with confidence, charm. They know exactly what to say. Most people are drawn in immediately. This person, they're asking questions no one else thinks to ask. Why are they trying so hard to impress us? What are they not telling us? Psychologists sometimes call this healthy skepticism. And here's where it gets interesting. These people are incredibly difficult to manipulate. While others are falling for emotional appeals and charismatic presentations, they're watching behavior, not words, actions. Think about a moment when you felt pressured to say yes to something. They don't feel that pressure, not the same way. They have boundaries most people only dream of having. From a psychological perspective, they've developed what's called emotional independence. They don't need constant validation. They don't crumble when someone disapproves. Because, here's the thing, when you expect nothing from people, disappointment loses its power. And this is the part that surprises most people. They're often more self-aware than others. They've spent years analyzing human behavior, including their own. They know their triggers, their patterns, their defense mechanisms. But something deeper is happening here. Here's where the research gets uncomfortable. There's a biological reality we can't escape. Humans are wired for connection. Not in some poetic sense, literally. Think about this. Chronic isolation increases cortisol levels. It weakens immune function. It impacts cognitive performance. Our brains physically need social bonds. And this creates a painful paradox. Imagine needing water but being terrified to drink. That's what it's like for these people with connection. They crave it biologically, but trust it? Never. Researchers describe this as anxious avoidance. You want closeness, but the anxiety of vulnerability is overwhelming, so you stay close enough to function, far enough to never really connect. Here's something most people never notice. There's a specific kind of loneliness these people experience. Not the loneliness of being alone. The loneliness of being surrounded by people and feeling completely isolated. You're at a party. People are laughing, talking, connecting, and you're watching it happen like you're behind glass. But here's where it gets even more complicated. From a psychological perspective, they often create what's called a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you approach every relationship expecting betrayal, you behave differently. You're distant, you test people. You pull away at signs of trouble. And eventually, people leave. Not because they wanted to betray you, but because they got tired of never being fully let in. And when they leave, it confirms everything. See? I knew I couldn't trust them. The cycle continues. But something even deeper is at play here. Here's what years of research shows, and this might change how you see these people entirely. The people who trust no one aren't actually distrustful by nature. They're disappointed idealists. Think about that for a moment. You can only be betrayed if you expected loyalty. You can only be disappointed if you hoped for something better. From a psychological perspective, their distrust is actually evidence of caring. Indifference would be easier, safer. But they're not indifferent. Picture this. A person who genuinely didn't care about human connection wouldn't build walls. They'd just not engage. But these people, they engage, they're present, they function in relationships. They've just surrounded themselves with protective barriers. And here's where it gets profound. Those walls weren't built to keep everyone out forever. They were built as a test. If you're patient enough, if you're consistent enough, if you prove you're different, maybe, just maybe, they'll let you in. Psychologists sometimes describe this as earned secure attachment. It's harder to achieve, takes longer. Empowerment requires more patience, but when it happens, it's remarkably strong, because it wasn't given blindly. It was earned through demonstrated trustworthiness. But something most people overlook is happening here. Here's something researchers have found. These people often have incredibly accurate instincts about others. Not perfect, but uncannily accurate. Think about why that is. When you spend years analyzing behavior, watching for inconsistencies, reading microsignals, you develop a skill most people never build. You become a human behavior expert, not from textbooks, from necessity. From a psychological perspective, they've developed what's called social threat detection. And here's where it gets interesting. Sometimes their distrust isn't irrational at all. Sometimes they're seeing something everyone else is missing. Picture a group of friends. Everyone loves this new person, but this person, they're hanging back, observing, waiting. And 6 months later, when that person's true character reveals itself, everyone's shocked, except them. They saw it from day one. But here's the painful part. Being right about people's capacity for betrayal doesn't make the loneliness easier. It actually makes it worse, because now you know your distrust is justified. So why would you ever risk trusting? And this creates what psychologists call a cognitive trap. The evidence supports your worldview, so you never test alternative possibilities. But something even more fundamental is happening beneath all of this. Chapping. Think about this for a moment. What is trust, really? Most people think it's about believing someone won't hurt you. But from a psychological perspective, that's not quite right. Trust is actually about believing that even if someone hurts you, you'll be okay. That's the shift. It's not, they won't hurt me. It's even if they do, I'll survive it. And this is what people who don't trust anyone struggle with. Not the idea that people might hurt them. They know that's possible. It's the fear that if they're hurt again, they won't recover. Researchers describe this as catastrophic thinking. One betrayal won't just hurt, it will destroy them. So the only safe option is to trust no one. But here's where the psychology reveals something important. That fear. It's based on outdated data. The hurt from childhood, from early betrayals, those hit so hard because we were younger, more vulnerable, less equipped to handle them. But we're not that person anymore. We've survived. We've adapted. We've built resilience we didn't have before. The same betrayal that devastated us at 15 might hurt at 35, but it won't destroy us. And this is what most people who don't trust anyone never realize. They're protecting a version of themselves that no longer exists. So here's what the research and observation ultimately tell us. People who don't trust anyone aren't broken. They're not cold or heartless or damaged. They're just operating from a different data set than most people. Their experience has taught them that people are unreliable. That vulnerability is dangerous. That the safest position is independence. And based on what they've lived through, that makes perfect sense. But here's the thing about psychology. The strategies that help us survive aren't always the ones that help us thrive. Distrust keeps you safe, but it also keeps you alone. From a research perspective, the healthiest approach isn't blind trust or complete distrust. It's something researchers call calibrated trust. You trust based on evidence. You adjust based on behavior. You protect yourself without cutting yourself off. You recognize that some people will disappoint you, and that's okay, because you're strong enough now to handle it. Not every wall needs to come down. But maybe some of them can become doors instead, doors you control, that you can open for the right people, and close when necessary. Because here's what years of observing human behavior reveals. The opposite of distrust isn't blind faith. It's the wisdom to know the difference between people who've earned your trust and people who haven't. And maybe that's what trust was always supposed to be. Not a leap of faith, but a calculated risk worth taking with the right person. That's what I see.